All right, let's get ourselves in gear about speech codes for a minute. I want to do these examples with you as a way for you to think about the different speech codes, the rules that you deal with, and then I want you to be thinking about consequences of them. And so, for instance, here's a kind of speech that you can engage in. Right? You can engage in complaining. Right? Complaining. Now, there are a number of different settings you live in as a communicator. You live in your family, you live in your workplace, you live in your dorm setting, you live in all these kind of places. All right. Pick one of them and tell me what are the rules about complaining in that speech culture. Speech code? Yeah, we're still doing speech code right now. So, give me a setting. Family, work, dorm, school, some other setting. What are the rules about complaining in that setting? Let me get someone else who hasn't been part of it. Let me get, I can't even remember yet, the name in the back there. We'll catch it.
Me?
Yes.
Oh. I'm sorry.
That's okay. All right, so we got a place where you can complain. So pick a place where you complain. Work, home?
Work.
All right, let's take work. All right. So what are the rules about complaining at work? Are there rules? Do you know who you can complain to, when you can, when you can't, what you can complain about, what you can't complain about? What?
Well, I mean, you should really only be complaining to your boss. If you have a problem with someone, you really shouldn't be complaining to everyone else about other people, you know.
Okay, so in that case, there's kind of a formal speech code of the way it ought to be, and then there's kind of the real speech code the way it is, the practical speech code the way it is. So how does it work in the situation you're in? Just who can you complain to, really?
I guess my boss.
Okay, so you can complain to a boss. When can you complain to a boss? Can you complain first?
Or after work.
First thing in the morning?
Like what you should be doing? Or
well, what is the code that's in effect? What is the speech code? What are the rules that govern this speech act in this setting?
Then you should complain before or after work.
Okay.
Or on your day off, or not while you're working.
Okay, so the rule is in this particular thing that you should complain to the boss, not to other people. You should complain not during work time, before or after work. What other rules are there about this complaining?
I know we have like an office manager, and sometimes you have to make an appointment.
Okay. So if you were to go to them and start complaining about something, they might say to you, this is the wrong time for this, make an appointment.
Right.
Okay. They're enforcing a speech code at that point where they tell you this is not the right time, the right place for this to be happening.
Some places make you file a complaint instead of actually just going up and complaining.
So the rule is that complaints are not spoken, that they are written. Right? So you might be a person who goes to work in one place and there's a certain set of rules about complaining, and then you go work in another place and there's another set of rules about complaining. So you've got to pay attention carefully to the rules that are operating where you work or what you're doing.
I don't know if this makes sense, but it has to be kind of like a legit complaint.
Okay. That it has to be legitimate. You're saying it has to be, can't be picky. It can't be some things you can complain about, some things you can't complain about. Right? What counts as a complaint, what doesn't count as a complaint. Right? So there'll be all kinds of rules to these things. So let's say you've got a rule where the rule at work here is that all complaints must be given in written form. What are the consequences of that? This is where I want you to see that speech codes have consequences. So Teamsterville code has a consequence. Nasarima code has a consequence. What's the consequence of having a speech code where every complaint can only be given in a written form?
I think the way they process is going to go.
It might not always get taken care of.
Okay, so there's delay. Okay, it depends on writing skill. So it limits that to people who are good at writing.
It may cause a spiral of silence because someone may not want to go through that process of writing it up.
Okay, so you might get unspoken complaint, which could be a problem because then it would fester in the group. You wouldn't get feedback you need.
It might not get like when a person writes, sometimes you would just say stuff like verbally, it's
Okay.
all down. So it might not be like clear.
So verbal maybe works better, you know, and a lot of times when people are complaining, what they want is not necessarily an answer, but they want someone to listen to them, to value that they are having an issue. So this cuts off the human dimension, the one-to-one interactive dimension from it.
No, I was going to say kind of deals with that too. I was going to say like face-to-face, you get, like you see their reaction and you can understand like their facial expressions.
Okay, you lose the face-to-face dimension. So if you work in a place where you have the power to set a code, you want to think about what are the consequences of this code. I mean, one of the consequences, I don't have to listen to people complain all the time. But one of the downsides of that is that it's likely to be unspoken. People aren't comfortable doing it. You lose the face-to-face. So a speech code has a consequence to it. Right, so complaining at work, you have a code, you have to learn how you do that. All right, let's talk about a challenging communication. You want to challenge something.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Like about complaining at work, who really goes to the boss to complain? I mean, that's like the formal rules.
Right.
Is there like a subculture of complaining at work?
Yeah.
Where like you would go and complain to your coworker and you guys would nag about how work isn't fun. And
Right.
then like nothing will get accomplished maybe, but you still get to complain.
Right.
Or maybe like in a meeting it'll get brought up.
Okay, so the rules, again, it's a speech code question. So the rules may be we talk to each other about our complaints, but we don't talk to the boss directly about them. And maybe we voice an indirect thing in a meeting somewhere. That's the code that we live by, which has consequences to it then,
Yeah.
if that's a speech code.
Probably less effective,
So-
but more realistic.
Right, so why is it not the code that we go directly to the boss with our concerns and deal with it that way? You know, you ask questions about why is it this way instead of another way.
A lot of companies now have these hotlines you can call, so you don't even have to deal with someone who's either, like, let's say, in your store or your direct boss. You just make the complaint, and I guess someone in HR looks at it, and then they'll either, I guess...
Okay, so some businesses set up communication hotlines, which I suppose are anonymous to some degree.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then people can voice their complaints. Well, that sets a new speech code in action. Yeah, I think the speech code you're talking about is a common speech code, but it has negative consequences for the...
I was just going to branch off what he had said. I noticed, like at our job, over the past, if you make a complaint, it usually comes back bad for not only the other person, but for yourself. Like there's in other words, it's not like, okay, we take that into consideration and this person will get reprimanded for it. It usually has a rule that involves the two of us. And then you get to the point where you think a lot before you make a complaint.
Okay.
Because you don't want the consequences
All right,
of it.
so if we had a direct one, that would have other consequences.
Right.
Right. So codes, the point here is to recognize that we make the codes. We create the codes. So it's not reified. They don't just come and then we have to fit into them. We have the possibility of reshaping the rules by which we do our communication. So let's talk about challenging. Let's talk about this in the home. All right. or in your dorm thing. Someone was writing about conflict in their dorm quad or whatever it is here, you know, where they're challenging the behavior of others in the quad. What are the rules about that? What's the speech code for challenging your dorm mates about things?
Do it in a mature manner.
Do it
in a mature manner.
Okay, like what would that look like?
Poor hero.
What would that not look like?
Yeah, don't, like if you're mad at someone for like being too loud, don't like turn your music up louder to like overpower them. Just
Okay.
talk to them directly.
So that would be, if you were turning the music up is an indirect way of challenging, right? That would be an indirect way of doing it. So you turn your music up, they turn theirs up. You're not dealing directly with it. You're dealing indirectly. What other?
You could just bring up the problem directly, but in a very unthreatening way.
Okay. So non-threatening could be part of the speech code. That it's considered out of the code to go screaming and threatening somebody in that setting. I mean, what is the code? Is there a code in each individual dorm? Is there a code at the school? Is there a...
Is it depending on the challenge, the RA can get involved, or the...
Okay.
That's indirect, isn't it?
Involving the... Yeah, I'm going to go get the RA. That's an indirect code.
Maybe there can be room meetings with all of the
Okay. Engage the whole room. That would be a code. Engage the whole room. Engage others. I mean, what is it where you are? Go ahead. Yeah. Just.
I would say, like, if you don't feel like you can speak verbally to, like, your roommate or something, because you feel like there's going to be conflict, like, as soon as you say something, you would always, like, just be like, all right, I know you have a problem with, like, things that I do, and you know I have a problem with the things that you do. Why don't we just write it down, and then, like, you know, we could discuss it.
Okay.
Like that.
So that's a speech pattern of that starts off with confession of, I know you don't like everything I do, so there's a pattern to it, right? And you can, if you study the patterns, you can describe that, and then you can write, okay, in our room, this is the speech code, in our culture, the little culture we create here. But you want to ask this, like in families a lot of time, there are no codes to allow challenging what's happening in a family. The code is you don't challenge this or that, right? So in some places that's the way it is.
What family is that?
I've had a lot of students over the years who were from immigrant families here, and a lot of them will tell the stories of they live with their grandparents and with their parents, who are first-generation immigrants from Greece or from Estonia or wherever. And there are some real speech codes going on about who gets to say what to who.
Or the respect level of
Yeah.
the elders.
Asian homes. So there are some really severe speech codes at work. All right, correcting. What's the speech code about correcting? What is the speech code at Montclair State University for professors to correct students' work? Is there a code to that? Is there where it happens, when it happens, how it happens, what kind of language is used? Is there a code to it?
Would it make sense to be like unbiased? Like if a professor doesn't like a student for some reason, they can't correct their work based on, like, that to be fair.
Okay, so in our setting, you cannot be biased by race, gender, appearance, disability, sexual orientation, any of these things. So it's part of our code that you can't say to someone, well, you're just a stupid such and such, right? That's so. That's just part of our code.
Would grades itself be a code? Because the grades itself kind of give a nominal position.
Okay, grades are a way to communicate correction. Right. And in my code, I have a speech code here, and I grade the things 0 to 3. And so I'm sending correction messages. If I say 1.9, that's I'm saying you need to ramp it up and read more and apply more to what you're doing. If you get a 2.3, I'm saying you're on track. You're really putting it together. If I say a 2, I'm saying, all right, this is just about okay, but you may want to think about it. So part of the correction is indirect. That's indirect correction. And usually I try to write something on your things too. But that's part of the speech code. That's easier than doing it face-to-face, right? With time issues, but it's easier somehow to get correction maybe that way than face-to-face. So by email, that may be part. It's easier to do correction by email than it is by face-to-face. What are some other practices of correction that there are codes about?
Blackboard.
Okay, you can use Blackboard, use electronic communication again. About?
I think maybe the language that's used, like if it's excessively negative. All
right.
Or you want to put down something.
So we don't use no negative. We don't say, that's really wrong. No, you have no idea what's going on here. We don't do that, right? So we always say, well, okay, that's part of it, or you're on track. But we're careful. We have a speech code that says in correction, we're careful.
Like able to listen, I guess would be a good one.
Well,
listening. And then like being open-minded, I guess, about like different things that people say.
All right, well, hopefully it's non-threatening so that it doesn't create a defensive reaction. Right. So, yeah, it's just to point out to you that there are these things we're all part of all the time about rules, how things should be communicated. And we're not always aware of it. And Phillipson wants us to think, could we describe the speech code that we participate in our home, in our work, and are we good at code switching? He doesn't go into this a lot, but this is part of the research, that there are people who can code switch. They can change their rules for speaking. They use a different vocabulary. They use a different set of rules about who they talk to, how they talk to them. And people who can code switch are more successful because you can adapt to many different speech cultures and work within them. If you don't switch speech codes, you're likely to end up unsuccessful in being able to work. You can't take the street into the business place. You have to change the codes.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, if you have like a bad day outside of the classroom, like you don't want to get into the classroom and just like take it out on the students, whether it be like grading or discussion-wise, I guess.
Right. So you have to switch codes into your professional code, and function that way. Right. All right. So that's all we're going to do about speech codes for today. But this might be a nice reflection for you this week. If you can identify a place, a culture you're in, home, work, dorm, where you can describe the rules, who talks to who in what way, what's forbidden communication, what is allowable, then that'll be a good reflection, where you're analyzing, like Phillipson did, the speech code that is present in that setting. All right. Now let's shift gears now, and we're going to talk about culture theory or cultural studies. Now, you're going to have to help me out again because I'm old. And you all are 22?
19.
20s. So you're born in 1986, 87?
88.
Holy mackerel. Okay, this is going to be really hard for me. So there was something called punk in music, right?
The 80s.
Was that 80s or was that 60s? I don't even know.
Yeah.
80s. Punk, right? Somebody tell me something about punk. What was the deal? What was it about? When did it start?
Punk was like a
Where did it start?
Is that?
It was a rebellious time.
Okay.
Kids wanted to dress the way they wanted. Their hair was all wild.
Okay.
And made a good costume.
Okay, so punk starts out, and it starts out as a counterculture to dominant culture. All right, let's talk about what would that mean if I say to you that punk started out as a counterculture. What am I saying? That it was against mainstream, it was against the clothes you would buy, it was against the music you would buy in the albums in the store.
I was basically say the same thing. It's just going against what was societal norms, basically.
Okay, so you had sort of mass popular culture that in the 80s looked like something. I don't know what it looked like. But then you had a group of people who promoted a counterculture, punk. And so part of punk's dress was that you put things together that didn't usually go together, or that you pinned them together or sewed them together in crazy ways, and you didn't care about it. All right, so it starts off outside of mass popular culture as a rebellion against it. Now, what has happened to punk over the years?
Found ways to market it.
Okay, so mass popular culture, like a giant amoeba, reached out and absorbed it. Right? So now you can go to the mall and there's a store and you can buy punk stuff that somebody has created somewhere, and you can buy the punk look. We call that a couple of things. We call that a commodification. So in the beginning of the movement, you made your own stuff. That was part of the deal. You didn't buy punk stuff. You created it yourself. And that was a rebellion against having to buy things from the stores for the costs, the prices that people wanted to get things from. But now, you could walk into a mall, put down your money, and walk out with a punk identity, right? You can buy the clothes, you can buy the music, you can buy the stuff, and it becomes purchasable. It becomes a commodity. Anything that is purchasable becomes a commodity. So the commodification. This is also known as co-optation. So that the punk movement gets co-opted by mass popular culture and becomes part of it. And so all of a sudden people who are punk, trying to be punk in a counter cultural way, find that all of a sudden there's all these people around them who are buying the identity, and it no longer works for them. All right, so Stuart Hall in cultural studies is interested in asking the question, how does this happen that these things get co-opted by popular culture, by mainstream mass culture? And his answer is that by and large it's a media issue. Stuart Hall. we're into cultural studies now. And Stuart Hall is looking at questions of why do people's efforts to be unique, to have power outside of the system that exists, why does that not work? Why do they keep getting absorbed into the mainstream culture?
Because if these businesses see that if punk is in demand, then they're going to support it and make money off of it.
Okay, so how does it become in demand? How does it become mainstream? See, this is Stuart Hall's question. It's a good point, but it's the question of how, and Hall wants to say it's media. Go ahead.
I think it's like people have like this inherent desire to be individuals and like be completely original, and they see this little movement that doesn't necessarily have the attention of like the mass culture, so more and more people join it, and then the media sees this and then realizes, hey, this is becoming popular, and then it gets absorbed in the mainstream.
Okay, yeah, and so see, from a communication theory standpoint, part of your theory is that people desire to have an individual identity. They don't want to be just part of the mass. They want to be individual. So that's a very important part of the theory, because it then says that people then communicate in ways to achieve that goal.
I don't know so much if it's individuality more than like they want to be like everybody else. Like if there's like let's say a group comes out that's punk, like everyone wants to kind of look like that punk look, and that's why all these stores start selling. Oh, like this new person's in, they're punk. Everybody likes them, so they all want to dress and look like that person. That's how it kind of becomes.
Okay.
You can go for anything like the goth look, the like
sure,
the the preppy look, like you know,
right.
just certain looks that like people like aim to, I think.
Right, and independent bands get into this problem too. Although the internet is changing that for bands, but you know, it was for a number of bands started out and then got co-opted and commodified, and their fan base gets upset about that, while they're making millions of dollars now in the mass popular culture. But all right, let's get back to Hall here. Okay, so the question that Stuart Hall has is, why does this happen, and how come people accept this? Why do the masses accept the way that they become commodified, so that their identities are built around buying things? Right?
Because when you're surrounded by so much like Uggs, people thought they were disgusting, and then you just see them all over the place, so it's like you give in.
Okay, yeah, so people get overwhelmed, as it were, with a wave of this, and they buy into the commodification, or what is in Stuart Hall language is a capitalist. So this gets into economic language. So we're going to have to do a little economic language here.
It kind of reminds me of the new shoe Crocs.
Yeah.
Like everyone, you know, I think they're kind of ugly, but everyone keeps saying, "Oh, they're comfortable." And I mean, I started thinking really good.
Crocs. Yeah. Crocs. All right. So, well, how do these things happen, and where do they start? Becomes Stuart Hall's question.
I'm not sure if this is, you know, consistent with his theory, but I think that in the case of punk, it reached a critical mass, and then the fashion industry usurped from that.
Okay.
They exploited it and sold it to the mass population.
So the fashion industry, the music industry, and sometimes these are together called the culture industry. I don't know if that's language you're familiar with, but it's sometimes referred to as the culture industry, that we live in a day when culture is mass-produced, marketed for us as commodity. So we buy our identities. You know, you have to have enough money to buy your identity.
I was going to say also, when you were starting to talk about that, like back then, they had Madonna in that movie, Who's That Girl? And that was also when Culture Club came around. these were like you just said, in the music culture, big wigs. And I think a lot of kids especially wanted to follow in those footsteps.
And so the culture industry was prepared to provide that for you at a cost. Right.
Big cost, right?
At a cost. So here's the way this shapes up. Now, if you got to go to 1940s, all right? So let's go back to 1940s. You have Europe and you have World War II in this time, okay? And you've got some societies that are known as fascistic